Lieutenant Sarah Chen had always been different from other humans, but she never imagined that difference would make her the most feared warrior in the galaxy. Standing barely 5 feet tall with jet-black hair tied in a practical ponytail, she looked nothing like the towering alien warriors that dominated the Galactic Defense Force. Yet here she was, about to embark on a mission that would forever change how the universe viewed humanity. The year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Alliance for exactly 53 years. Most alien species still considered humans to be weak newcomers, useful only for their surprising adaptability and stubborn refusal to give up. The Krillian Empire, a militaristic race of 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors, particularly enjoyed mocking human soldiers during joint operations. Sarah stood in the briefing room aboard the Alliance flagship Concordia, surrounded by her mixed-species squad. Commander Vextar, a massive Krillian with emerald scales and glowing yellow eyes, towered over the holographic display showing their target, a heavily fortified enemy outpost on the planet Zarian 7. "The Shadowborn have established a weapons manufacturing facility here," Vextar's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Intelligence reports indicate they're developing some kind of new energy weapon. Our job is simple. Get in, gather intel, and get out without being detected." The Shadowborn were the galaxy's newest threat, a mysterious species that seemed to appear from nowhere, striking Alliance worlds with devastating efficiency. They were pale, humanoid creatures with completely black eyes and an unsettling ability to move silently through any environment. Their technology was unlike anything the Alliance had encountered, making them extremely dangerous. Sarah studied the hologram carefully. The outpost was built into a mountain face, with multiple levels carved deep into the rock. Energy barriers protected the entrances, and automated defense systems covered every approach. It looked impossible to infiltrate. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Sarah's voice was quiet but confident. Vextar's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "What is it, little human?" Several squad members chuckled at the dismissive tone, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had endured worse treatment during her 5 years in the GDF. "The conventional approach won't work," she said, pointing to the hologram. "Those defense systems are designed to detect large groups and heavy weaponry, but they're not optimized for a single infiltrator using unconventional methods." Lieutenant Zarath, a blue-skinned Altarian with 4 arms, crossed her appendages skeptically. "Are you suggesting a solo mission? That's suicide, even for a human with your species' death wish." "Not suicide," Sarah replied calmly. "Strategy. Humans have something most species don't. We evolved as persistence hunters. We're naturally gifted at tracking, stealth, and adapting to hostile environments. While you're all stronger and faster, I can get places you can't and survive situations that would kill others." Vextar's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Brave words from someone who weighs less than my armor. The Shadowborn would tear you apart before you got within a mile of that facility." Sarah had heard variations of this speech countless times. Despite humanity's contributions to several Alliance victories, most aliens still saw them as inferior. What they didn't understand was that humans had spent millions of years becoming the galaxy's most adaptable survivors. "With respect, sir, I've studied every recorded encounter with the Shadowborn. They rely heavily on overwhelming force and psychological intimidation. They've never faced a human operating alone in hostile territory. Our species has a unique talent for surviving against impossible odds." The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of their doubt, but she was used to that. Every human in the GDF had learned to prove themselves repeatedly. Commander Vextar studied her for a long moment. "Very well, Lieutenant Chen. You'll have your chance to prove human worth. But this is a reconnaissance mission only. Gather intelligence and return. Do not engage the enemy unless absolutely necessary." "Understood, sir." "One more thing," Vextar added with what might have been amusement. If you succeed in this impossible mission, I'll personally recommend you for advanced tactical training. But if you fail and somehow survive, you'll spend the rest of your career cleaning waste recyclers." Sarah nodded without emotion. She had already made her decision. This wasn't just about completing the mission. It was about proving that humanity deserved respect in the galaxy. 3 hours later, Sarah stood in the ship's armory selecting her equipment. Unlike her alien squad mates who preferred heavy armor and powerful energy weapons, she chose lightweight gear designed for stealth and survival. Her suit was a matte black composite that could adapt its surface temperature to match surrounding environments. Her weapons were minimal: a plasma knife, a compact sidearm, and a selection of tools that most aliens would consider primitive. The ship's quartermaster, a stocky dwarven engineer named Thorak, watched her preparations with curiosity. "You sure about this gear, lass? The Shadowborn are nasty fighters. Might want something with more stopping power." Sarah checked her equipment one final time. "Stopping power won't help if they can't find me first." Thorak nodded approvingly. "Aye, there's wisdom in that. Your people have an interesting approach to warfare. Most species try to become stronger than their enemies. Humans seem to prefer becoming smarter. Evolution taught us that the strongest predator isn't always the one who survives," Sarah replied. "Sometimes it's the one who can adapt fastest to changing conditions." The dropship that would take her to Zarion 7 was a small, stealthy vessel designed to avoid detection. As Sarah strapped herself in for the journey, she felt the familiar mix of nervousness and excitement that came before dangerous missions. But there was something else this time, a burning determination to prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's elite warriors. The pilot, another human named Marcus Webb, glanced back at her. "You know they're all betting you won't make it back, right?" "What are the odds?" 20 to 1 against. Sarah smiled grimly. "Good thing I never listened to odds." The journey to Zarion 7 took 6 hours. Sarah spent the time reviewing intelligence reports and memorizing every detail of the facility's layout. The Shadowborn had chosen their location well. The planet was a frozen wasteland with toxic storms that could kill most species within minutes. Even with environmental suits, most aliens could only survive on the surface for a few hours. But humans had evolved in some of Earth's harshest environments. Sarah's ancestors had survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and deadly predators. A little cold and poisonous air wouldn't stop her. As they approached the drop zone, Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "I still think you're insane for doing this alone." "Maybe," Sarah replied, checking her gear one final time. "But sometimes insane is exactly what the situation requires." The dropship's cargo bay opened, revealing the hostile landscape of Zarion 7 below. Howling winds carrying toxic particles whipped through the opening, but Sarah's suit automatically adjusted to protect her. Without hesitation, she leaped into the storm. As she plummeted toward the surface, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. This was what humans did best: survive in places where others couldn't, adapt to impossible conditions, and find ways to win against overwhelming odds. She didn't know it yet, but in the next 72 hours, she would earn a code name that would become legend throughout the galaxy. The Shadowborn were about to learn why humans had survived long enough to reach the stars, and why underestimating them was the last mistake many enemies ever made. The frozen ground rushed up to meet her, and Sarah Chen prepared to become something more than just another Alliance soldier. She was about to become a nightmare that alien warriors would whisper about in the darkest corners of space. Sarah hit the ground running, her enhanced suit absorbing the impact as she rolled behind a cluster of crystalline rock formations. The toxic wind screamed across the barren landscape, carrying particles that would have shredded an unprotected human in seconds. But her environmental suit held firm, its adaptive systems automatically filtering the poisonous atmosphere. She crouched low, studying the terrain ahead through her helmet's enhanced vision system. The Shadowborn facility was carved into a massive mountain approximately 3 kilometers away, its entrance barely visible through the swirling toxic storm. Energy barriers flickered across multiple openings, and she could detect the heat signatures of automated defense systems even at this distance. Sarah activated her suit's camouflage system, watching as the surface shifted to match the surrounding rock and ice. Within moments, she was virtually invisible to most detection methods. It was time to begin the careful approach that would either make her career or end her life. The first challenge was the terrain itself. Xerion 7's surface was a maze of razor-sharp crystal formations, unstable ice sheets, and toxic gas vents that could kill even through environmental protection. Most species would need vehicles or heavy equipment to traverse such hostile ground. But humans had spent millennia learning to move efficiently through dangerous environments using nothing but their own bodies. Sarah began picking her way across the landscape with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Her movements were economical and precise, each step calculated to minimize noise and energy expenditure. She had studied the storm patterns for hours during the journey, and now used that knowledge to time her advances with the wind gusts that would mask any sound. After an hour of careful movement, she encountered her first Shadowborn patrol. 3 pale figures moved through the storm with unsettling coordination, their completely black eyes scanning the environment with mechanical precision. Sarah froze behind an ice formation, barely breathing as they passed within 10 meters of her position. The Shadowborn were every bit as disturbing as the reports suggested. They moved with an eerie silence that seemed to defy physics, their footsteps making no sound even on the crunching ice. Their weapons were sleek energy rifles that hummed with barely contained power, and their pale skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But as Sarah watched them, she noticed something interesting. The Shadowborn were scanning for threats they expected: energy signatures from vehicles, heat patterns from large groups, communication signals from standard military equipment. They weren't looking for a single organic infiltrator using primitive stealth techniques. After the patrol passed, Sarah continued her advance. The storm was intensifying, which worked to her advantage. The howling wind and swirling particles would mask her approach, while her suit's systems could navigate conditions that would blind most sensors. 2 hours into her infiltration, Sarah reached the outer perimeter of the facility. The mountain face rose before her like a technological cliff, studded with sensors, weapons emplacements, and energy barriers. According to intelligence reports, the main entrance was protected by enough firepower to stop a battalion. But Sarah wasn't planning to use the main entrance. She had spotted something during her study of the facility plans: a thermal exhaust vent approximately 50 meters up the mountain face. It was too small for most species to use, and the temperature differential would be lethal to many aliens. But humans had an unusual tolerance for extreme temperatures, and Sarah's compact frame would allow her to navigate spaces that others couldn't. The climb was treacherous. The mountain face was a mixture of natural rock and artificial materials, with handholds that were often slick with ice or radiating heat from internal systems. Sarah's enhanced gloves provided grip and protection, but she still had to rely on her species' natural climbing ability. Humans were among the few species in the galaxy that had evolved as natural climbers. Their ancestors had navigated complex three-dimensional environments for millions of years, developing an intuitive understanding of balance, leverage, and risk assessment that most aliens lacked. As she climbed, Sarah encountered several automated defense systems, but the sensors were calibrated for large threats approaching from predictable angles. A single human moving slowly up the vertical surface registered as nothing more than a temperature fluctuation or minor wildlife. The exhaust vent was exactly where the intelligence reports indicated, though it was smaller than she had hoped. The opening was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and waves of superheated air poured out with enough force to knock most beings off the mountain. Sarah studied the vent carefully, timing the heat cycles and calculating the brief windows when the temperature dropped to survivable levels. Her suit could protect her for short periods, but prolonged exposure would overwhelm even its advanced systems. She waited for the next cycle, then moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah squeezed into the vent during a brief cool period, using her hands and feet to brace herself against the walls as she crawled deeper into the facility. The space was claustrophobic and filled with mechanical noise, but she pressed forward with the determination that had kept humanity alive through countless evolutionary challenges. The vent system was more complex than expected, branching in multiple directions like the circulatory system of some massive technological organism. Sarah used her helmet's mapping system to track her progress while following her instincts about which passages would lead toward the main facility. After 20 minutes of crawling through increasingly narrow spaces, she finally reached an internal access point. Through a maintenance grating, she could see into what appeared to be a storage area filled with equipment she didn't recognize. Sarah carefully removed the grating, checking for alarms or sensors before dropping silently into the facility. Her boots made no sound on the metallic floor as she moved through the shadows between towering pieces of alien machinery. The air inside the facility was different from anything she had encountered. It seemed to absorb sound and light, creating an atmosphere of oppressive silence that felt almost alive. The walls were covered in a material that shifted slightly when observed directly, as if the building itself was somehow organic. Sarah activated her recording equipment and began documenting everything she could see. The Shadowborn technology was unlike anything in Alliance databases, with designs that seemed to follow principles that defied conventional physics. She moved deeper into the facility, using air vents and maintenance passages to avoid the main corridors. The layout was confusing, with passages that seemed to curve back on themselves and rooms that appeared larger inside than their external dimensions should allow. As she explored, Sarah began to understand why the Shadowborn were so dangerous. Their technology wasn't just advanced. It was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Their weapons, their ships, even their buildings seemed to operate on principles that challenged basic understanding of reality. In what appeared to be a laboratory, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. Dozens of containment units lined the walls, each holding what looked like biological samples from various Alliance species. The implications were terrifying. The Shadowborn were studying their enemies in detail, learning their weaknesses, and developing targeted weapons. Sarah documented everything, her recording equipment capturing details that would help Alliance scientists understand their enemies' capabilities. But as she worked, she became aware of something else. She was being hunted. The facility's security systems had detected something unusual, even if they couldn't identify exactly what. Shadowborn guards were beginning to patrol areas that had been empty before, their black eyes scanning with increased intensity. Sarah found herself in a deadly game of cat and mouse with opponents who moved like ghosts through their own facility. But she had advantages they didn't expect: human intuition, adaptability, and the predatory instincts that had kept her species alive for millions of years. As alarms began to sound in distant parts of the facility, Sarah realized her reconnaissance mission was about to become something much more dangerous. The Shadowborn knew an intruder was present, and they would soon dedicate their full attention to finding her. But Sarah Chen was no longer just a lieutenant following orders. She was a human warrior operating in her natural element, hostile territory where survival depended on intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to complete the mission. The hunt was just beginning, and the Shadowborn were about to learn why humanity had earned its place among the stars. The facility's alarm systems created a symphony of haunting tones that seemed to resonate through the strange materials of the Shadowborn construction. Sarah pressed herself against the wall of a maintenance corridor, listening as footsteps approached her position. But these weren't the heavy boots of conventional soldiers. The Shadowborn moved with an unsettling silence that made them even more dangerous. Through a ventilation grating, she watched as 3 Shadowborn guards glided past. Their movements were coordinated with mechanical precision, but there was something else. They were communicating without sound, their black eyes flickering with patterns of light that suggested some form of telepathic or technological link. Sarah had gathered enough intelligence to complete her mission. But something had changed during her time in the facility. The biological samples, the advanced weapons research, the detailed studies of Alliance species. The Shadowborn weren't just preparing for war. They were preparing for extermination. The thought crystallized her resolve. This was no longer just about proving human worth or completing a reconnaissance mission. The entire galaxy was in danger, and she was the only one in position to do something about it. Sarah began moving deeper into the facility, abandoning stealth for speed. Her enhanced suit's systems provided detailed maps of her route as she navigated through passages that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. The Shadowborn architecture defied conventional logic, but Sarah's human intuition helped her navigate spaces that would have confused most other species. She reached what appeared to be the central command area, a vast chamber filled with floating displays and control surfaces that pulsed with alien energy. Dozens of Shadowborn technicians worked at stations throughout the room, their pale forms moving in perfect coordination. At the center of it all stood a massive Shadowborn that was clearly a commander. It was larger than the others, with intricate markings covering its pale skin and eyes that seemed to contain swirling darkness. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache. "The intruder has penetrated deeper than calculated," it said in Alliance Common, though with an accent that made each word sound like a threat. "Increase search patterns, deploy hunter units to all sectors." Sarah activated her recording equipment, capturing everything she could see and hear. The intelligence value was enormous, but she realized she might not survive to deliver it. The Shadowborn were sealing the facility section by section, methodically eliminating possible hiding places. As she watched, one of the floating displays showed detailed plans for attacks on major Alliance worlds. The scale was staggering. The Shadowborn had mapped the defenses of dozens of planets and were planning simultaneous strikes that would cripple the galaxy's ability to resist. But what truly horrified Sarah was the timeline. The attacks were scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours. Even if she escaped immediately, there wouldn't be time to warn the Alliance and prepare adequate defenses. The weight of millions of lives pressed down on her shoulders. But Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her mind. This was what humans did. When faced with impossible odds and certain death, they found ways to win anyway. Sarah began moving through the command center with a purpose that surprised even her. Years of training, combined with millions of years of human evolution, focused into a single moment of clarity. She wasn't just going to gather intelligence and run. She was going to stop the Shadowborn attack entirely. Her first target was the facility's power core. Every advanced installation had a central energy source, and the Shadowborn facility was no exception. If she could create a catastrophic overload, it would destroy the command center and cripple their coordination for the planned attacks. Sarah made her way through maintenance passages toward the facility's lower levels, where the power systems would be located. The route took her past laboratories and manufacturing areas where she could see the true scope of Shadowborn preparations. Thousands of advanced weapons, biological warfare agents, and technologies that could devastate entire star systems. The power core was located in a chamber at the facility's deepest level, surrounded by automated defenses and energy barriers. It was a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with contained energy, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Sarah studied the setup carefully, using her suit's sensors to analyze the power flow and containment systems. The Shadowborn had built redundant safeguards to prevent exactly what she was planning, but they hadn't accounted for human ingenuity and desperation. Using her plasma knife and technical knowledge, Sarah began carefully dismantling the containment field generators. It was delicate work that required precise timing and steady hands, but her human dexterity allowed her to access control systems that were too small for most species to manipulate. As she worked, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The Shadowborn had detected her tampering with their power systems, and hunter units were converging on her position. Sarah could hear their approach, the whisper of movement that was somehow more frightening than heavy footsteps. The first Shadowborn hunter rounded the corner, just as Sarah completed her sabotage. It was a nightmare creature even by their standards, with elongated limbs and weapons that seemed to be grafted directly to its body. Its black eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity, but Sarah was ready. Years of training with weapons designed for her smaller human frame had taught her to fight smart rather than strong. As the hunter raised its energy weapon, she rolled between its legs and slashed upward with her plasma knife, severing critical power connections in its armor. The Shadowborn's scream was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a sound that seemed to contain frequencies that bypassed the ears and struck directly at the nervous system. But she pressed forward, using her speed and agility to stay ahead of its retaliatory strikes. More hunters poured into the chamber, their coordination perfect and their weapons devastating. Sarah found herself in a running battle through the power core chamber, using the massive crystalline structures as cover while she fought for her life. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. Sarah could feel something changing inside her, a transformation that went beyond adrenaline or training. She was becoming something that the Shadowborn had never encountered, a human warrior pushed beyond all limits, fighting not just for her own life, but for the survival of entire civilizations. She moved through the chamber like a force of nature, her plasma knife carving through Shadowborn weapons and armor with precision that bordered on artistic. Her enhanced suit's systems provided targeting data and tactical analysis, but it was her human instincts that guided each movement. The power core began to destabilize as her sabotage took effect. Energy discharges crackled through the chamber, and the crystalline structure started developing visible cracks. The Shadowborn hunters realized what was happening and began focusing their efforts on stopping the overload rather than capturing the intruder. But it was too late. Sarah had triggered a cascade failure that would consume the entire facility within minutes. As she fought her way toward an escape route, she could hear the facility's structure beginning to fail under the strain of containing energies that were never meant to be released. The final Shadowborn hunter stood between her and the exit passage. It was the commander she had seen in the central chamber, now armed with weapons that hummed with barely contained power. When it spoke, its voice carried a tone of grudging respect. "You fight well for such a small creature," it said, raising its weapon, "but your defiance ends here." Sarah faced the alien commander without fear. "No," she said quietly, her voice carrying a certainty that seemed to surprise even her. "Your war ends here." The battle was brief but intense. The Shadowborn commander was stronger, faster, and armed with superior weapons. But Sarah fought with the accumulated wisdom of human evolution, using tactics and strategies that her species had developed over millions of years of surviving against impossible odds. When the commander finally fell, Sarah felt something click into place in her mind. She wasn't just Lieutenant Chen anymore. She had become something new, something that would be whispered about in alien languages across the galaxy. The facility was coming apart around her as she raced through collapsing passages toward the surface. Energy explosions lit the darkness behind her. and the mountain itself began to tremble as the power core reached critical overload. Sarah reached the surface just as the facility exploded in a pillar of light that could be seen from orbit. The blast wave knocked her flat, but her enhanced suit protected her from the worst effects. As she lay on the frozen ground, watching the destruction she had caused, Sarah realized that everything had changed. The pickup signal she activated would bring the Alliance fleet to investigate. They would find evidence of the planned attacks, along with proof that a single human operative had prevented a galactic catastrophe. But more importantly, they would find a new kind of warrior. When Commander Vextar and the rescue team finally reached her, Sarah was sitting calmly beside the crater where the Shadowborn facility had been, reviewing the intelligence data she had gathered. "Lieutenant Chen," Vextar said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. "Report." Sarah stood and faced the towering Krillian commander. "Mission accomplished, sir. The facility has been neutralized, and I have detailed intelligence on Shadowborn capabilities and planned operations. And the enemy forces? Eliminated." Vexatar studied the massive crater, then looked back at the small human who had accomplished the impossible. "All of them?" "All of them." Later, as word of the mission spread through the Alliance fleet, other species began using a new term when they spoke of the human operative who had single-handedly destroyed an entire Shadowborn command facility. They called her Ghost Walker, a name that captured both her ability to move unseen and the fear she now inspired in enemy forces. Sarah Chen had claimed her legendary codename not through politics or promotion, but through actions that proved humanity's worth beyond any doubt. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again, and the Shadowborn Empire had learned a crucial lesson about the species they had planned to exterminate. In the years that followed, Ghostwalker would become more than just a soldier. She would become a symbol of human determination, a reminder that sometimes the smallest warriors cast the longest shadows. And whenever alien forces threatened the Alliance, they would find themselves wondering if a certain human operative was watching them from the darkness, ready to strike when they least expected it.